Easter is God's ultimate story. For those who have eyes to see it, it ushers in a new heaven and a new earth, and it changes everything for everyone. There's a moment when Jesus is on the cross that really matters. In John 19, verses 26 and 27, Jesus looks down from the cross and sees Mother Mary standing next to his best friend, the beloved disciple. And from the depths of Jesus' soul, he looks at Mary and he says this, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. The Gospel of John just knows how to tell a story with more than just words. Here in John 19, the scene itself declares a new family is forming, a new heaven is realizing, and we're all invited to be a part of it. Through his death, Jesus brings us before the God of love. And despite our differences and origins and sins, Jesus' death transcends and says, we are now part of God's family. Humanity is now healed and united by this. And this is the good news of Easter, which has me thinking something that I really want you to get. The good news of Easter is not just primarily a message about Jesus. All right, I know that sounds weird, but let me flesh that out a little more. The miracle of Easter is not just that Jesus resurrected from the grave. Okay, now that sounds even worse, but hang with me. The good news of Easter isn't that Jesus overcomes the grave only. Think about it. If all that happened that day is Jesus wakes up, now that's amazing, and it's a miracle, but it's not the good news. The good news is that Jesus' resurrection invites us all to be saved. And I'm talking humanity. The good news is that Easter invites us all into God's loving family. Just like in John 19, we're all brought to the cross. Mother Mary is now all of our mother. The beloved disciple is now our brother. We have a place within God's family too. Now, yes, Jesus dies for our sins and salvation. I'm not being flippant with this or saying that that doesn't matter. Quite the opposite. Yes, Jesus died and 3 days later overcame the grave. And this miracle is the miracle of all miracles. But it's not the good news. The ultimate story of God's abiding love is that through his death and resurrection, we are invited into the family of God. Through Christ, we are family. Through Christ, we are invited. Through Christ, we're seen and known and named. Through Christ, we too have the power to become children of God. I love this thought. It takes the story of Easter and it deepens it for me. You have a place in the family of God too. Jesus died and resurrected to bring you into everlasting life too. And this isn't a new thought. It may sound new, but it's not. For centuries, though, the Western Church has painted the Easter scene with Jesus being alone, front and center. Sometimes, most of us may even post a picture on social media of an empty tomb and there's no person. Our culture typically thinks of Easter as the story of Jesus and Jesus resurrecting alone. The grave is empty, death's been defeated, and honestly, all that is right and good. But the Eastern Orthodox Church sees Easter a bit differently, and I think they're closer to what's right. When they paint the resurrected scene, what flows from the empty tomb is Jesus accompanied by humanity. Children, adults, families, friends. They paint Jesus saving, rescuing, pulling humanity up out of Hades together. For the Eastern Church, Easter is corporate, and it includes you and me. But not everyone has eyes to see this deep truth initially. It was hard for the followers of Jesus to see it. I mean, look at John 20 again. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciples set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look, and he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. Verse 10 is interesting. The disciples just went home. They didn't understand the scriptures. They didn't have eyes to see what they were actually seeing. They didn't know what the good news would be. They knew Jesus' body was gone, but they couldn't see how they were a part of this new change too. So they just went home. I think we're still like this. We know in our minds that Jesus is the answer. We know in our souls that something happened 2,000 years ago, but it's a thought experiment. We don't have eyes to really see how it changes us, how we're invited in, how it affects us, and then what we're supposed to do with it. The disciples do figure it out eventually, but the story in John 20 shifts next to Mary Magdalene in verse 11. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head, the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. She didn't have eyes to see that she was a part of the miracle either, which is understandable. She shouldn't be at fault for this. If anything, she's searching and hoping to find where Jesus is. She just didn't have eyes to see it yet. When I was in seminary, in Atlanta, I would go to Braves games a lot. I remember there was one time we would go as a group, and I was sitting next to a friend, and he was really just going for the social aspect of it. We were all going. He didn't care much for the game of baseball at all. I remember it was a midweek game. It was an early start, and back in the day, and the Braves played at Turner Field, early start games meant the sun was right on top of you, and it's hot. The wind doesn't blow there like it does here. So if you already don't have a propensity to appreciate the game of baseball, then it's not going to magically happen while you're sitting in a stale 93-degree heat. Anyway, so I'm sitting next to my friend. He doesn't really appreciate the appeal of the game. I try to coach him up throughout the game, trying to tell him it's a game of anticipation and strategy, but honestly, he wasn't hearing it. He was just hot. All my friend was thinking about was the blistering heat and how it was the 7th inning, and we've got another hour of this. I remember my friend looked at me in the 7th inning and said, "Can we just go get a Coke and a pretzel?" I say, "All right, but just hold on. Let me just see what happens right here on the field." It's a 1st and 3rd situation. It's a 1-run ball game, and we're in the top of the 7th inning. My friend said, "I don't know what it is you're seeing, Barrett, but all I know is it's hot." And about that time, the catcher calls time and steps out from behind home plate. And my friend loses his mind. So the catcher is out from behind home. He's called time, and he signals to the shortstop. And after signaling to the shortstop then turns, takes off his hat, and signals to the first and third baseman. The shortstop then turns to center field and signals to him. The center fielder then turns to the left field and to the right fielder and gives them a signal. Then all of a sudden, everybody in the field begins to move. The center fielder, left fielder, and right fielder back all the way up to the fence, and they're in what's called a no-double situation. And what they're trying to do is make sure in a first and third situation that with the base hit to the outfield, the guy from third is going to score, but they don't want the guy from first to get from first to home. So what ends up happening is they try to cut off the line drives into the gap. And by doing that, you can get into a no-double situation. The infielders begin to move too. In a no-double situation, first and third move down the line. Shortstop and second move closer to second. You're hoping the pitcher throws a low and away fastball or slider to get a ground ball and into a double play because you still have the force out at second base. So we're sitting there. Pitch comes. Ground ball to second base. Flips it to short. Throws it to first. 4, 6, 3. Double play. At that moment, my friend looks at me and says, "See, nothing ever happens in the game of baseball." And at that moment, I realized that is absolutely true if you don't have eyes to see it. The exact same is true with faith. If you know what you're seeing in baseball, it changes everything about the game. The same is true with faith. If you know that Jesus' death and resurrection is for you, to save you, to give you power to become a member in the family of God, it changes everything. But you could be right here this morning, in this very room, with all of us in church, standing in front of the resurrected Jesus, and it's possible to still not see it. So how do you see it? That's the purpose of church, and what we are ultimately inviting you to be a part of here at First Baptist. And the rest of the story of Mary shows us how. Look at verse 15. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." This is all of us, by the way. This is our personal search for truth and salvation. We, like Mary, are on the hunt, exploring and asking questions of faith. Look at verse 16. Jesus said to her, "Mary." Did you notice what he called her first, though? And then here, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Now that gets her attention. She's recognized, even affirmed. And that's how faith starts for all of us. We feel seen. At some point, we feel God's presence in our lives. It's affirming to us. Our questions of faith are then met with intrigue and even some answers along the way. And the deeper we go, though, into faith, we move like Mary from being recognized to being known. Woman becomes Mary. I become Barrett. We all become known. And we see the good news bursting forth once more to say, the resurrection is for us all. The story continues. Mary, she turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Do not touch me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. Did you catch verse 17? Jesus said to her, "Do not touch me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." I'm not sure I've ever heard a sermon on that verse, but once you have eyes to see this truth, you can't unsee it. How do I know the good news of the resurrection is for all of us? Because of verse 17. Go to my brothers and say to them, I am sending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. And this is the common hope. Easter is not just about Jesus. God is saving all of us through him. The ultimate story of God's abiding love is that through his death and resurrection, we're invited into the family of God. Through Christ, we're family. Through Christ, we're invited. Through Christ, we're seen and known and named. Through Christ, we too have the power to become children of God. We just have to have eyes to see it.